Midnight Wandering by Robin the Robo. Grilby didn't know exactly what was in the void, or what the void even was to begin with, but based on how damaged Gaster had come back from it, he assumed it must be something far beyond whatever his admittedly limited imagination could come up with. This unfortunately meant that since the skeleton was either unwilling or unable to share what he had been through, Grilby was stuck figuring out on a case-by-case basis how to deal with the aftermath of Gaster's traumatic experience. It had barely been a week after Gaster had moved in with him when it happened for the first time. Grilby felt the bed dip and the blanket shift, and he cracked open one eye. In the soft light that his own body cast around the room, he saw Gaster standing up, looking a bit shaken up, but otherwise fine. "Where are you going?" he asked groggily, turning to give him a proper look. Gaster had been spacing out since he'd come back, so he wanted to make sure he was aware of what he was doing. But thankfully the skeleton immediately turned around, caught by surprise by Grilby's voice. I just need a glass of water." The skeleton signed slowly. "I'll be back in a minute." Grilby, still mostly asleep, just nodded and drifted back to sleep. When he woke up again, he wasn't sure how much time had passed, but it seemed to him that it had been longer than a minute, and he was still alone in bed. He waited another minute, staring up at the ceiling as concern welled up in his core with every second that passed. Gaster had looked fine. The light in his good eye socket hadn't been dim like it became when he wasn't fully there, and he'd answered him. He should have made sure. Finally he stood up and made his way down the corridor, walking past Fuku's bedroom where the teen slept peacefully, and then heading downstairs. He was still on the last step when he heard some sort of choked-up noise coming from one side of the room. That's when he saw Gaster, curled up in a corner as translucent tears streamed down his face. "Gaster, what are you doing there?" He stepped closer, kneeling next to him to try to understand what the problem was. He didn't seem hurt from what he could see, but he looked absolutely terrified. What had happened? No, you're not real. You're not real. Leave. You're not real. "Dear, I can't understand you if you don't sign. What's wrong?" Grilby tried to touch his shoulder, but Gaster squeezed himself farther into the corner, a sob leaving his non-existent throat. "I don't want to go back. Please don't make me go back." He managed to sign, his hands shaking so much that Grilby had some trouble making out what he was saying. "You're not going anywhere. You're safe," he said, but Gaster shook his head. "You're not even real." "Of course I'm real." "Gaster, what happened? You're scaring me." "Don't do this to me!" The skeleton signed with snappy movements, letting out another sob. This time he didn't resist when Grilby scooped him up and hugged him tight. "You're safe. See? I'm holding you. I'm plenty real." "It's dark and cold, and I'm scared this isn't real." Gaster signed. He looked exhausted. "Of course it is." Grilby shined brighter and fanned himself hotter, hoping it would make the skeleton nestled in his arms feel a little better. "We're in our house on the surface, and Sans and Papyrus are just a phone call or 10-minute drive away." "We're not. It's impossible." "Here, how about I show you?" The elemental stood up, carrying Gaster in his arms, and made his way through the back door and into the backyard. "Look up, love." Gaster saw the stars above him and let out a small gasp, and Grilby had never been as thankful for the lack of light pollution in their area as in that moment. He walked up to the swing bench and sat down, holding the skeleton in his lap. The wood was damp, and it stung a bit through his pajama pants, but he could take it. After a while, Gaster signed again. "I'm sorry." "Don't worry about it." "No, really. I went downstairs, and it was dark, and suddenly I wasn't in the living room anymore. I didn't even remember where I came from or what I was supposed to be doing. I was back there, back to not existing." He let out a frustrated sigh before continuing to sign. "It wasn't even pitch black. You could see the street lamps through the windows." Grilby held him a little tighter. "We could leave some lights on around the house. You hate wasting electricity. I hated seeing you like that way more." Gaster didn't reply. Instead, he rested his head on Grilby's shoulder, deep in thoughts, and stared up at the night sky. After a minute, he shivered and signed. "I'm cold. Yeah, I think it's time to go back to bed." They stood up and headed back inside, holding hands, one step at a time.